had hardly any problems because the Japanese didn't have hardly any troops there. They just had their construction crews there. But then the Japanese got hot and sent down some troops and started sending their fleet battleships down and bombarding the Marines who were there. And the Marines wanted protection from those night bombardments.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't getting it very well. And what ships we had there were cruisers and destroyers, lighter whip. And so the sequence was that the admiral pulled out, since our ships were getting the worst of it in these night engagements.
Yeah.
The admiral that was in charge of the operation pulled our fleet out.
Mm.
And the Marines screamed, "What are you doing, leaving us subject to these night bombardments?" And they relieved that admiral and put Halsey in his command.
You want to see on the globe where it is?
And he told them, he said, "You have to go in and protect those Marines."
Mm-hmm.
Was that the Battle of Coral City?
No matter what. No, it was before the Coral City. And so our fleet did go back in, and they got the hell beat out of them that night. But the Japanese didn't know they were coming back in, and they had their guns, their cannon loaded with shrapnel instead of high explosive. And so they had a battle in which some of the ships pulled in alongside of us. They looked like somebody just taken them out of a little ship and shot a BB shot at it. It just riddled with them. A destroyer pulled in alongside us, and they looked like they answered that many holes in that fuselage. I couldn't believe it.
You look at those islands; they're just a speck on the map, and
But in any
you
event,
wonder what happened to what all the indigenous people
then
thought about all that
the
stuff.
Japanese started pouring more troops down to hold it, and we were getting kind of the worst of it because we didn't have any big battleships there, but they were using what they had, because Halsey says you're going to stay there and try to protect those Marines.
Yeah.
And the Japanese were actually getting the best of things, but our Air Force, our fighter pilots, managed to start bombing the troop ships the Japanese were bringing down additional troops when they were landing. They caught them, and they did so much damage, the Japanese retreated and pulled out. Those fighter pilots saved the day. They managed to catch the Japanese when they were unloading the troops.
Mm.
You want to see?
And then we moved the main base from what you said. What was it?
New Caledonia.
New Caledonia to Espiritu Santos.
Ulamea.
Espiritu Santos.
And Espiritu Santos, yeah.
And we were in Espiritu Santos for about a year. They had a huge. It was a harbor, sort of. It was at both ends. There was that little island that was. It was open at both ends.
Mm-hmm.
And so it made a perfect harbor.
It's
And
really
the
not far
seaplanes-
off the coast of Australia.
The
It's not-
seaplanes just were coming and going from there. Since they were managed to get some progress up towards like the Coral Sea you mentioned and so forth, they started moving some of the the squadrons they're there up the line and still operating. They started using Guadalcanal as the main base. And during that period, we stayed at Espiritu Santos as the headquarters for the seaplanes. And then we had a sequence of seaplane tenders that we moved from one to the other. Our patrol squadrons. It was the USS Tangier, and then the Kokomo, and then the Chandelure, and then the Curtis. And I moved from ship to ship with them. And we cooperated with, we operated the crash boats when anybody was landing and coming and going. We handled all the physicals for squadrons, and they had a constant rotation of doing exams. And on each one of these seaplane tenders, they had a long 20-foot little examining room, in which you had all the equipment for doing flight physicals.
So was that before or after you got married?
Oh, that was before.
That's what I thought.
And,
So what were the Australians doing?
Huh?
What were the Australians doing at that time? I mean, you were protecting Australia. Were the Australians involved in these operations?
The Australians were cooperating in some ways, but most of their fighting people were up in their men were up get the hell beat out of them up there in Turkey.
Oh,
Turkey?
yeah, well, it was World War II, everybody was involved.
World War II.
Huh. That seems odd that
Well,
they
the
would send them so
Australians
far
were
away
still,
and not have
they
them
were still
protecting
part
their
of the
homeland.
empire.
They made an amphibious landing,
Before they
and
became
the
independent.
Turks stopped them. And the Turks were on the ridge,
England was
and
pulling
the
the strings.
Australians were on the beach
Yeah.
getting the hell beat out of them. They lost a lot of people there.
Want to see where it is on the map?
I think they must have been
On the
involved in
globe?
some of that Pacific
Yeah.
fighting later. Because we saw,
I'll put the light on it.
But New Caledonia and that's where
Where-
the Santa took up the stuff is, they covered up. And, it was raining, and I started skidding, and my back, as damn good I had a four-wheel drive, because my back end was beginning to skid off the road on the side of the hill, but the front wheels had power, and I was able to pull myself out of it. Boy, was I happy when my squadron got orders to go north.
I can imagine.
WA Wave, Women's Auxiliary Volunteer or something. That was, but they were hospital corpsmen, but they were in the category of volunteering for the war, you know. And they called them Waves. But anyway, about half the crew were women, corpsmen all over the place. And when I started going to the mess hall, everybody was talking about who was dating who and who was this. And I had 3 women working for me in medical records, you know. And I thought, I'm not going to get mixed up in this mess. I'm not going to date anybody in the hospital. I'll do it. So I had gotten acquainted with some guys that went into the town into Memphis, which is about 20 miles away. And they had, anyway, to make a long story short, I had a car that wasn't working properly, and I put it in the shop on Saturday afternoon and walked down to the highway with my roommate who was with me, and that's where I met Mother. The little tiny restaurant. It wasn't any bigger than this room. It had a little dance floor, like that corner, a jukebox, and over here an opening with a little bar, a little service bar on it. And it was just a little recreation place. And she and her, another nurse, and I recognized them right away because I'd seen them in the hallway, you know. And they were just in slacks and top. They weren't in uniform. And there were 2 sailors in there with them. They weren't corpsmen. They were from the naval. They had 2 bases near the hospital. Naval Air Station, which trained new pilots. And across the road, they had Naval Air Technical Training Center, which was teaching the ground crews, mechanics, and so forth that support the planes, you know. And so that was the main source of the hospital's business, supporting those 2 bases, plus convalescent patients from elsewhere in the U.S. where they wanted to put them down there in that area where they were convalescing. But they had an artificial limb shop in the hospital too. And so we had some people who knew artificial limbs there. But that's the way I met your mother, and the way we had danced around to the jukebox. I and my friend kind of butted in and asked him for a dance. And so I guess within an hour, you know, I had got acquainted with your mother, but just on the dance floor.
Yeah, was Mom a good dancer?
Yeah, well, she was just the same as I was. Not a great dancer, but she could move around. It was just very...
She jitterbug?
No jitterbug. We didn't have jitterbug music there. But anyway, it came time that some civilian came in and sat down with us and was conversing. We weren't sitting with them. Mm-hmm. We were at a different table. And he sat down there, and we decided it was time that we wanted to go back to the hospital. And we didn't have any transportation, and the civilian volunteered to take us back. Mm-hmm. But he'd had a few drinks, and so he said, well, we took him up on it, but my roommate said, if you don't mind, I'll drive. So the guy said, fine. And then, somehow or another, your mother heard that we were going back, mm-hmm. and she elected to go back with us.
Yeah.
And so she and I were in the back seat together. Mm-hmm. And on the way back, we had choice conversation. Mm-hmm. And we seemed to get along well. But then I never saw her again for a month. I worked on the 2nd floor of the ad building, and she was down in the wards, you know. And they had all these little boards to build around the compound. And I reached for the in basket to check these records that had been typed before they went back to the doctor. And I ran across Alice Ford. Mm-hmm. And I recognized the name right away. And then I looked at the date, and her birthday was that day. And I thought, she was nice. Maybe I'll just go back and see if she was. So I found out what ward she was working on. I got down and walked back, and I walked to the end of the ward, and she spotted me. And so she stopped whatever she was doing and walked up and met me. Uh-huh. And I told her, I didn't let her know that I knew it was her birthday.
Yeah.
I just said, I just thought maybe I'd ask you if you would like to go out this evening. And she looked at me and said, well, yes, she said. That was the beginning.
Yeah, didn't you tell me she broke a date with somebody else?
She did. She was told, she told me later that after she'd come out with me, this guy came back, but all the nurses were laughing because they were glad to see him. He was a guy that waited for every new nurse that reported aboard.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He asked for a date with them and leaving the last date not used anymore, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the nurses were tickled to death to see him get stood up. The work there.
That's funny.
But then from then on, for 7 days straight at least, we went out every evening.
Yep.